Today I'm going to show you how I drew this portrait of the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, using colored pencils. And for the materials that I used, please refer to the video description. First off, I just want to mention that I'll be referencing some colors that I used, but please keep in mind that I'm not actually completely accurate on the colors since I wasn't keeping track. But I know it's beneficial to know what colors are used in case you want to replicate, so I tried the best I could to remember. So first I started off with the eyes and I began working on the pupils using a sepia, which is like a dark grayish color with some brown in it. And for the iris, I believe I used sepia, raw umber, slate gray, and then some black once I had to darken up like the edges and go back with the pupils. And then I used white for the highlights. So the whitest part of the eye I kind of left untouched, but then I used a white color to just blend that white of the highlight into the rest of the iris to give a nice transition and a glossy look. Next I work on the ball of the eye, so I use like a buff titanium which has like a light yellow tinge to it. You don't want to keep the eyeball completely white because it's not going to look natural, it's going to look freakishly white. So you want to have like a yellow or blue tint to it. And then the corners of the eye, I used some gray color to just create the shadow from the crease of the corner of the eye and from the eyelids, and then around the edges of the eye too where the eyelid is meeting the eyeball. And then I use a white to kind of blend out the gray color so it transitions nicely, like a nice gradient shadow. And then I used a pink color and then I believe like a reddish brown color for the tear ducts, and then using white to blend that out, and then also to make the highlights on top of the tear duct as well. And then also blending with the white, the pink into the white of the eye to also make a nice transition too. You also noticed that I used a black pencil to line her eyes, and then also worked on some of the eyeshadow color on her lid. If you're doing a non-makeup look, you definitely don't want to use black pencil to line the eyes because that would look very unnatural, but because she has makeup on in this picture, I went ahead and used a straight black for that. And then I moved on working on the other eye. So moving on to her eyeshadow, I just kind of colored the basic color of her eye, or her skin color around the eye and the eyelid just to get the base color, and then I built up the eyeshadow colors. I believe for the eyeshadow colors I used burnt ochre, sepia 50%, burnt sienna 10%, primrose, and buff titanium. So the primrose and buff titanium I believe are for the highlighted area under her eyebrow. So you're just keeping in mind like the darker colors going in the creases and the shadowed areas, and then just nice gradient up to the lighter colors. And then just continuing on with her skin color too. To do the skin color, it wasn't just like a straight pencil, I had to blend. So I used like burnt sienna 10% for the base color, and on top of that I laid a brown ochre 50% on top to create her skin tone. And the nice thing about the Luminance pencils is they have a lot of the colors, but they have different values of the colors. So for burnt sienna, there'll be like a burnt sienna, then like a burnt sienna 10%, and a burnt sienna 50%. So just mixing and matching those colors for like the shadow parts, you're gonna get like a darker color, and then the colors use the lighter values. So that's kind of nice. They all kind of will mix nicely together to get the different values that you need. And then I use some other pencils for like the creases, like the creases in her wrinkle, I get a little bit darker there. And then the creases under her eyes as well. You might use like a different pencil completely, like the deep shadows, I might use the sepia 50% or the regular sepia, or maybe brown ochre. And then with the shadows too, you're gonna get like the wrinkles in the shadow. You're gonna use like the darkest colors for the very crease part, but then you might want to use a little bit other shades to just kind of blend it so it transitions nicely, so it's not just a harsh line. You don't want to have a harsh line look. You always want to kind of blend it into the rest of the skin. Then when you work on like the nose, and actually with the whole face, you just want to keep in mind where the bone structure is and the muscle and the fat is laying, and then kind of your strokes are going to kind of follow those lines as to where the direction of the skin is being pulled, and then keeping areas to be highlighted, or you can always add the highlights on top of the base color after. So the highlights on the cheeks, and then the shine on the nose, and then you just have to really study your reference photo to see where the shadows are going to hit and where the highlights are going to show. Especially if you know, like round surfaces, there is like a highlighted shadow on the underneath part that is just reflecting light. So keep in mind that, and then where also like the dark parts of the shadow is going to hit like the rounded areas too. Now I just work on adding more shadow and depth through the skin, just mixing different colors to add a nice gradient of the shadow, and then all over the face adding highlights, and this just creates a lot more depth through the face. And then also you'll notice I don't add the details like the eyelashes and the eyebrow hairs until the end, because you want to make sure you have the skin completely set before you add more details, so that you don't erase out the details once you're done. For the lips, overall I used a light base color of the anthraquinoid pink. I believe that's how you say it, I'm not sure. And then the inside shadow, I used the burnt sienna 50%, or it might have been a sepia 50%. And then the darker parts of the lips, I went over with a burnt sienna 10%, and then I mixed that with some orangey brown color, which was the burnt ochre 50%. And then I lined the lips with the same burnt ochre 50% color, and added shadows on the teeth and the outer corners of the lips where the shadow is falling onto the teeth. I used a sepia for that, and then I used like a lighter gray shade for the shadows between the teeth. And you have to keep in mind that you're not creating sharp lines between the teeth to show each individual teeth with a separate line. You're just adding very light shadows between the teeth, to show where the spaces are deeper. I also colored the teeth with the buff titanium to make it look a little bit more natural, so it's not just a stark straight white. And then I also lined the lips with a burnt sienna 50% and also some brown ochre for the cracks of the lips and the edges. And then the highlights I used primrose and buff titanium. I may have used some other colors, but these are the basic colors that I believe I've used or can recall using for the lips. And it's just a matter of looking at your reference photo and just trying to recapture all the little wrinkles and details and the different shapes of the lips and the glossiness, by blending really well and then using the highlights and the shadows to achieve the look that you're trying to create. Also for the gums, I used the anthraquinoid pink and I think maybe burnt sienna 10% and then white to blend it in, and then also for the highlights. So here I'm working on the lashes of the eye, and just keep in mind, like I mentioned before, try to do the lashes at the very end, because if you have to do any touch-ups on the skin or anything that you need to fix around the eye, if you already have the lashes there, then it makes it that much more harder to do any kind of adjustments. And then I used a black for her mascara or her eyelashes because she's wearing a black mascara. But if you're trying to do a natural lash look, then you're going to want to blend your own black or whatever colors to achieve that look, just so it has more depth and more control over the tone. For the shapes of the eyelashes, you just got to pay attention to the length and where it's laying on the eye. So like the outer edges and inner corners are going to be more hook shaped. So like little letter J's or, backwards J's, depending on which part of the eye. And then as you get towards the center, it starts to become straighter and straighter until the very middle, where it's going to look more like a straight line, because the curve is coming straight at you towards the viewer. And then for the eyebrows, I just laid a base color underneath the brow, and then when I'm ready to add my little hairs, I just do tiny little strokes in the direction of the eyebrow, and then using several different colors to add a lot of different depth to the hair. So like a dark brown and then a slightly lighter brown. So then I just continue on coloring her neck with the same base color that I did her face, and just keeping in mind all the shadows and wrinkles. And then I went on to her earring. So for the colors I used for the earrings, I believe I used raw umber for the dark edges and the shadows of the gold, and then like a dark yellow, orangey, brownish color to show the gold colors, and then not laying that all over because it's a metallic and it's shiny. I only use those in that yellow in the shadow areas, and then kind of leaving the rest a little bit lighter, so like a lighter yellow, and then some areas even leaving it white, and then just blending those colors together. And then the pearl pieces, they're just mainly white, but then I use like a light gray color for the shadows. For her hair, I use a sepia undertone, so overall just using that sepia color to draw hair strokes throughout her head of hair, leaving some white areas for the highlights, and then going over the highlights with a burnt sienna for like a reddish color, and then some brown ochre 50% for like the brownish highlights that she has in her hair, and then also using black for the dark areas and areas in shadow. And then once I had a good thick layer of color on there, I used my Lisa Odorless Paint Thinner and my paintbrush, and just using a very scarce amount of paint thinner, just brushing that through the hair and melting all those colors together. And because you're using a paintbrush that's, you know, ideally made, the bristles are made of hair or synthetic hair, it's going to really create that nice texture combing through your hair. Of course, you're going to follow the direction of the hair when you're brushing as well. And then I noticed with the dark hair colors to you can go ahead and add more color onto the piece when the paint thinner is still wet on the paper. It actually melts really nicely, especially like the blacks and even the like the primrose or white to make the highlights on the hair. So then I go in, add more depth with the black, adding little, you know, shadows or lines of hair, and then some highlights in the hair that's reflecting on the light, little pieces of hair reflecting on the light. I did do a brief tutorial on drawing hair in a previous video, so I'll link that below as well if you want to take a look at that. Now I'm just continuing on with her shoulders. I'm just using the same base colors that I did for her face, and then just paying attention to her bone structure and the different highlights and shadows on her skin. I also want to note that if you don't have the Caran Luminance pencils, you can always use whatever pencil set you have, and you can look up their website and see the colors that I reference and see if you have something comparable to what I'm using, or somehow blend your own to create the same kind of looks that I'm trying to achieve here. You don't have to have an expensive pencil set to achieve the same type of looks, but the higher quality pencil you have, the less work it is for you to try to achieve the look, especially with layering a lot of different colors on top. For the gold dress, I use a brown ochre 10% for the overall base color of the dress, and then for the gold thread patterns, I used raw umber for the dark lines, which represented the gold that was in the shadow, and then raw sienna for like the yellowish gold colors. And then I also used a sepia 10% for the shadow and the lines in the fabric. And all it was just mimicking the different lines and textures that I could see in the reference photo. And then I also used electric eraser to pull out the edge of the fabric, and then also add imperfection to the fabric to make it more realistic, and then as well as pulling out reflecting light that was shining off of the gold thread. I used the electric eraser throughout the drawing to pull out different highlights or fix any mistakes as well. It's a really useful tool with colored pencil. And once you're done, you always want to go back and touch up all the different areas of the drawing that need to be fixed, or once you see the overall picture, just fixing up every little piece until you're satisfied. So here's the final piece. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.